true story of my encounter with an unknown figure. This is a real story of my experience with something unknown that left me shaken for days. I try to make it short, but also not lifting any details. My name is Bahman. I'm 20 and I'm from a small village in north of Iran, up in a mountain area surrounded with large forests. The story is for 2 years ago when I was 18. It was a partly cloudy day, and I was going to go for a walk in the forest like every day. In the main path of the forest, it crosses from behind of our house. So it wasn't like a long walk, but it was just deep in the forest. A dirt road with trees around you as far as the eye can see. It was kind of late compared to usual. It was around 5:30, 6 o'clock. It was getting dark, but because I was familiar with the path, I wasn't worried, and thinking I would be back soon made me just go for it. I was about 20 minutes into the walk, and it was just keep getting darker every minute. I get to a part of the path that is a straight road like 1,000 feet, and you can somewhat see the end of it. And as I was slowly walking in that road, I see a dark figure at the end of the road, just a black thing standing in the middle of the road. It was like a dusk kind of time, so I wasn't sure what I'm looking at specifically in that distance. My first thought was, it's probably a cow. It's a village, so many people have farms around here, and sometimes they let their cows in the woods for days, but in like a large group. But I thought then why this one is alone, and most importantly, why is it not moving? Believe it or not, I don't know why, but I didn't stop. It was the curiosity, maybe, or just didn't want it to be a chump. If it's a prank or some guy from my village. I don't know really what I was thinking in that moment. I just remember just looking at that thing without a blink as I was walking towards it. The thing that creeped me out the most was, why is this thing not moving an inch? I was just getting more and more scary as I was getting closer to it. I started to see a shape. It was a tall figure, long and skinny legs. At one point, I think I saw a third leg or maybe a stick in his hand. I don't know exactly. It was so blurry. I kept walking and still not knowing what I'm looking at. My heart, it was just coming out of my mouth. I stopped at maybe 60 feet of the figure, just looking at it, standing still without a single move or anything. I didn't have the courage to say anything. I remember just thinking maybe I should turn around and walk away. As I was walking back, I constantly looked back at my shoulder, paranoid of seeing that thing move, but every time it was just standing there and just kept getting further away and finally out of sight. It was almost completely dark at this point. After a few turns, I got calmed down a little bit. I didn't worry as much. I didn't run home like crazy and keep walking normal and try not to think about what just happened. I just started working with my phone to maybe call a friend, to just talk with them until I get home. And just before that, for the last time, I looked back, something I wish I never did. I saw something that traumatized me for life. It still makes my hands shake from fear to this day. I saw the same blur, black figure standing still in the middle of the road looking at me, like 50 feet away. I didn't stand there to see if it moved or not this time. I just run from my life. I run like if I stopped, I would die. I didn't look back once. I just run home. When I got home, my hands and feet were shaking, something that I have never experienced, and I hope I never do again. My family was worried too. After I told them what just happened, they told me I was hallucinating, but I could tell from their eyes that they are shocked and scared as I am. I never experienced such a thing again and never mentioned it to anyone until today. But this experience will forever be in my mind and haunts me forever. P.S. My biggest regret is that why I didn't film it or got a picture when I was walking towards it. Next story. Scary childhood memory. I thought this would be interesting to share. This happened when I was around middle school. I'm an only child and just lived with my dad. My dad would have to go to work early in the mornings, so he would drop me off every weekday around 5 a.m. at my grandma's house. I would go inside, go to her room, and sleep for a little more on her bed until I had to wake up for school. For better context, the house she lived in was a typical one-story house, nothing fancy, but there was always something off about that place. I had odd things happen, like the bathroom door being wide open for a while and just slammed shut, or hearing from a relative a spooky thing they saw while passing by a room, a dark shadow of a man sitting on the edge of the bed. I personally never seen this figure, but maybe he was the cause of this eerie memory. So it's 5 a.m. I enter the house like always and go to her room. My grandma was still asleep and did not hear me come in. My grandma had a single small bed that was by the wall. I always slept opposite from her, so my head was by her feet. I climbed into bed, and not 1 minute of me lying down and closing my eyes, I heard the door open and heard someone walk really fast and stop right by the bed. I felt someone or something stare at me. I could feel the presence so heavily in that stare. I will never forget the feeling that stare gave me. I was frozen and completely horrified. I knew that thing or person, whatever it was standing right by the bed and just staring at me. I dared not turn around. I kept my eyes tightly closed and clutched my blanket. Minutes felt like hours before finally I heard this thing walk out of the room and close the door. I'm glad I never turned around to see whatever that thing person was. I can't imagine what I would have been faced with. Next story. Hi everyone, I'm Victoria. The following story isn't mine, but I came across it. Thanks for sharing. Let's call the person in the story Amy. This all went down in 2014. So Amy, who was 12 years old at the time, finds herself home alone for the first time. Her parents, who we'll call Dave and Shelley, have set up security cameras all around the house to keep an eye on Amy and ensure she's 100% safe. They leave Amy home at 5 p.m. and plan to return at 8 p.m. Every 20 minutes or so, Shelley checks the cameras to make sure Amy is okay. Well, around 7:10 that evening, Amy gets a call from her best friend and neighbor, whom we'll call Laura. She picks up the phone, and all Laura says is, "Lock and close your windows, have the curtains cover them, and lock all the doors." Then hangs up. Amy had the call on speakerphone so Shelley could hear what was said. Shelley calls Dave over to see what's going on. Amy follows Laura's advice. A few minutes later, Amy's doorbell rings. She peeks out the peephole to see somebody just out of her sight at the door. She opens it, but no one is there. Since that day, Amy has been experiencing abnormal, paranormal events and believes she let something into the house that day. Next story. The creepy guys at a park. It was a hot summer day, and my mom took my siblings and I to play in the stream. at a park where people went for walks or went fishing. It was very isolated though, and there were hardly ever anyone around. My siblings and I were enjoying splashing in the water, and we even caught a few fish. Everything was going great, and we came here quite often. Until off in the distance, we heard a twig break, and we see these three guys coming towards us. We thought they were going for a walk or maybe wanted to go fishing, so we didn't pay much attention to them. We continued what we were doing, and then eventually they started coming closer to us. They started circling around us and just standing there staring at us. My mom started to become worried as us kids were confused as to why they kept staring and slowly coming closer. They all looked at each other in a creepy way and then continued surrounding us. My mom then grabbed us kids and told us to run. So the four of us ran away as fast as we could back to our car. I turned around to see what the guys were doing, and they were walking away now. Once we got to the car, my mom sped away, and then I realized what was going on. The guys probably wanted to do something to us, and since my dad wasn't there with us, it made us an easy target. My mom, my siblings, and I never went back there again, and if we hadn't run, I don't know what would have happened to us. Next story. When I was around 23 years old, I had three kids. One was a baby, and I had her in a stroller. My husband was at work, and we lived nearby, but we drove to the closest park. Once parked on the side of the road, you had to walk down a long, steep sidewalk to get to the playground. It was surrounded by a huge area of grass. I took my kids, 4, 2, and half a year old, down the sidewalk, and the kids started playing. I was just baby talking to the baby girl. After a while, this guy started making his way across the grass from pretty far away. I am overly cautious now that I am a mom, so I was already thinking, why is this grown man walking to the playground? Once he got a lot closer, I was telling my kids that we are leaving and let's go. They weren't happy. My 2-year old held onto a pole of the playground structure and kept saying no. He now was right next to us. He just stood there mumbling. I could not understand anything he said. He was not clean at all. He tried reaching for me a few times, but was not completely balanced. I was walking away at this point, obviously. I had the stroller and both kids holding onto it. Actually, I think I was holding my 2-year old with one arm and pushing the stroller with the other arm. This guy followed us up the hill to our SUV, mumbling nonsense the whole time. I was so scared he would grab one of my kids and run. Although he wasn't walking straight, I thought it could be an act. It took so long to get the baby's car seat in the car and my two kids in the vehicle. No, I didn't buckle them. I practically threw them in, honestly. I was so scared. He was right next to us, still trying to grab me loosely. Imagine somebody on drugs and drunk. Anyways, I finally got the stroller into the back, and this lady pulled up to the mailboxes, a big metal structure within about 50 resident locked mailboxes. She noticed what was going on and she yelled out to me to get in my vehicle and go. She will stay there until I leave. The man looked upset. I ran to the driver door, locked my SUV, and drove off. He stood there in my side mirror, watching us drive away. I am still thankful for that lady. I parked a little ways away and tried to explain the situation to my kids. I think I cried a bit. They were so confused on how their mama was acting. My 4-year old, which is 10 now, still remembers this and now she understands. We have had too many encounters that I don't go without my husband now. The store parking lot at night, no. Way too many counters. Next story. I was living in an apartment building in downtown Reno. It was a small apartment with only a living room connected to a small kitchen with a separate bathroom. I've had a few experiences in this building before, and so have my family, but this one kind of stuck with me. I was alone in the house one day because my family went out to dinner. They didn't take me because I was causing trouble earlier that day. I went into the kitchen to get a snack, and I noticed that the bathroom door was open, which was odd because we usually kept it closed because of the smell, and I went to investigate. After a minute or so, I determined that one of my siblings must have left it open before they left, and I went back to my business. About 15 minutes later, I had to use the restroom. I've had bladder issues my whole life, and I went through the kitchen to get there. I looked in the kitchen mirror and sort of nodded at myself back then. I was very obsessed with my appearance, and I thought I was hot stuff. Anyway, after I finished up in the bathroom, I went to do the same thing in the bathroom mirror, and I was shocked to see that my reflection was different. And I don't mean making a different face. I mean acting completely different. Didn't move like me, smile like me, or anything. I was honestly terrified. When I decided to just leave the bathroom, I saw that my reflection had finally smiled. However, it was not my smile. It was evil, inhuman. If you can imagine Joker from DC combined with Huggy Wuggy, that kind of what it looked like. Judge me all you want, but I never looked in that mirror again. A few months later, the mirror broke of its own accord and had to be removed. Nothing similar has happened ever again. Next story. Something laughed in my basement. This happened when I was 15. I'm 55 now. I was entirely alone in my house. Mom and my brothers were out of the house for the day. I think I must have cleaned my room. And coming up out of that heating vent from the basement below was a grating, grinding growl of a laugh. No, not a ha ha laugh, but devious and threatening. It had me and it knew I was alone, helpless. I froze where I stood in terror. I had a million thoughts. There was a demon in the basement. I stood there unmoving, because to move would be to acknowledge I had heard it. Listen, I was 15, not the most rational of creatures. I tried to rationalize away what I had heard. Maybe it was my older brother playing a joke on me. It wasn't, of course, that voice had been deep and guttural. Not even a grown man could have hit those low notes. I stayed frozen until Mom came home. I couldn't tell her or anyone what happened. To admit that it had happened would be to let the entity know I was aware of it. Then I'd be in even more danger. I tried to never be alone in the house for a long time after that, but something began to happen inside me. I had always been a very scary sort of kid. I would sing anytime I had to enter the basement because, of course, they can't hurt you when you sing. This was even before the laugh. But as time passed, I began to get braver about it. I still wouldn't talk about it, but as I got older, I began to get angry at the voice. It had scared me, but nothing had happened to me. It didn't come after me or try to get me, whatever the thing was. The only power it had was to make me feel fear. And so my fear of the basement began to lose its power over me. So much so that one of my brothers and I were in a bad fight one time. I hid tightly behind the furnace in the dark basement so he couldn't find me. He was more afraid of it than I was. So what is the point of all this? To this day, I believe there is evil, and then it can mess with us. But I also think there's a lot of hope. Comment. I don't know, but one day when I was between 6 or 8 years old, I'm 30 now, I was walking home from the bus. I had a pretty far walk. I don't understand the freedom I had as a child, as I guard my kids way stricter. But anyway, as I was walking home, I heard my name being called by an unknown voice, followed by a deep, witch like laugh. It was loud, like in your face. I, of course, stopped and looked around everywhere. We lived in a neighborhood where each house had at least 5 acres, so lots of empty space. Nobody was around. The laugh stopped and I ran as fast as I could with my little legs all the way home. Next story. My friend had me set up with one of her work friends as I was single and really had nothing to do for Valentine's Day. She confirmed everything beforehand with the both of us and arranged us a full on date. She booked a restaurant reservation for us and everything, and I was quite thankful to her for thinking about me that much. Anyways, fast forward to Valentine's Day. Me and my date were going to meet up at the restaurant for the first time. I had seen pictures of my date, so I knew what they looked like. We hadn't directly contacted or talked to each other before that because my friend wanted it to be a very blind date type experience. That is why she did all the arrangements for us. It was around 8 p.m. on Valentine's Day that we met up at the restaurant. My friend has actually drove me to the restaurant. Fast forward, I had a great time, and by the end, my date decided to drop me off at my place as I didn't come in my own car. I agreed, and off we went. My place at the time was a rental where I was sharing a house with 4 other housemates. It was a relatively big house, so 4 people living didn't feel crowded at all. The house was down this dark road, the ones you see in horror movies that are surrounded by nothing but deep, dark forests. Yeah, that was my way to my place. So at night, the road used to get quite scary, even for me. Anyways, as my date was driving, we talked about how nice the night went and we should meet up again for another date. I was excited to hear that and agreed. As we were chit chatting while on this scary road, we saw this woman standing at the left side by the forest, just waving her hands erratically at us. There were no other cars on the road. I don't know how to explain it, but the way she was waving her hand was really erratic as if she was in direct need of help. I told him not to stop the car as I was kind of creeped out, especially at such a scary dark road. It could have been a trap for all I know. My date at that point had slowed the car down a little bit as he thought that the woman was genuinely in need of help, but my intuition just didn't budge, and I told him not to slow down and keep going. All of this happened in mere seconds of her coming in our vision and me having a bad feeling. My date wanted to help her, but at that point I was getting really scared. So I told him a bit more loudly to not stop and keep going. As our car was side by side with this woman, I noticed her face even closely now, and it is something I will never forget. Her face was half burned, but not recently burned. You know how the burned skin looks after some time as it starts peeling off? I don't know how else to explain it, but she didn't look human. Her waving, looking looked very human, but her face didn't. And as we were almost side by side with this woman, who, mind you, was still waving erratically, my date also noticed her face. And that is when he stepped on the gas and zoomed from there. The scariest thing was how her face just didn't match her body's movement. Like from afar, she looked like someone waving the car, very panicking. But when we noticed her face, even when we were right next to her, Her face looked expressionless and not panicky, but she still didn't stop her waving, even when we sped up. I still remember looking back through the mirror, and she was still waving to us until she vanished from our sight. You know when you have a bad feeling about something in your gut, you should listen to it. That night, my date dropped me off, and rightfully so, was creeped out, and I asked him to stay at my place if he wanted to, but he insisted that he will take a different route. We did end up going on other dates, but unfortunately, it didn't work out. But that night still is ingrained in my memory of how she looked so expressionless and half her face burned. I think it was something inhumane, and if we would have stopped to help her, who knows what would have happened.